The topic for today is looking at Cohanim and looking at rainbows. All right, so we will start where the Gemara deals with
How
this.
about guys in rainbow-colored biking outfits?
A rainbow-colored Kohanim.
That's the world champions allowed to wear the rainbow.
Are you going to acknowledge the mustache just because this may be up in 50 years and they'll say,
And now what happens? What happens is like this: the Gemara.
right after Tisha B'Av and he shaved like a
All right. Now, the Gemara in Chagiga, Daf, Ted Zayin Amud Aleph says like this: Darash Rav Yehuda, Rabbi Nachmani, Meturgamine, Deresh Lakish. Rav Yehuda made this drasha. He was the Meturgamine of Reish Lakish. The Meturgaman was the person who, when you would give a drasha, he was like a human loudspeaker in the olden days, because they didn't have microphones and such. So the rabbi person would stand there, and then he would have a maturgaman who would say it out loud for everybody. And sometimes, they would embellish or, do different things
like
too.
sitting next to him or standing like
Nearby. The rabbi goes, and then you'd say,
story tonight.
Or something like that, yeah. So he made this drasha, and he said like this: Kol ha-mistakel begimel dvarim einav kehod. Whoever looks at these three things, their eyesight is diminished. Wow. Number one, bekeshet, a rainbow. Number two, nasi. A nasi is, let's call it the leader of the Jewish people. Ube kohanim. And if you look at kohanim. All right, so now we're going to see why all these things. So the Gemara says, bekeshet, the reason that your eyes will be bad if you look at a rainbow, Dichtiv Kemareh HaKeshet Asher Yeh Ba'anan B'Yom HaGeshem. Because Yechezkel, when he's describing this vision that he sees of God's glory, part of it is described as that it looks like a rainbow. So therefore, this is something that is too spiritual and too close to God's glory that it's inappropriate to look on it. Okay? It says, Hu Mar'eh Dmut Kvod Hashem. It looks like the glory of God, let's say. Now the next one is the Nasi. The Nasi, because we say in Bamidbar, V'natata mehodcha alav. The Nasi, the leader of the Jewish people, has hod, has also some aspect of God's glory on him. And now we'll get to the Kohanim, and then we'll get back to this whole thing and see what this all means. Mistakel b'Kohanim, and if you look at the Kohanim, what's the issue? They say it's Bizman sheBeit HaMikdash Kayam. It's when the Beit HaMikdash used to stand, there was a problem looking at Kohanim. Shehayu omdim al duchanan umevarchin et Yisrael b'shem ha-mefurash. Because they would stand on the duchen, and that's the podium, and they would say a bracha to the Jewish people, and they would use Shem ha-mefurash. In other words, they would use God's real name, the name that we write down, that is the Yud, and then a Hey, and then a Vav, and then a Hey, but we don't pronounce it at all. They would actually pronounce it in the Beit HaMikdash. This we call the Shem HaMefurash. And therefore, in the Beit HaMikdash, because they would say like God's real name, it was not okay to look at them. And this is one of the things actually that's written in the Mishnah, in Sota, in the 7th parak of Sota, Mishnah Vav. There, the Mishnah actually lists a bunch of things that were different about the Kohanim, the way they would duchen, the way they would say Birkat Kohanim in the Beit HaMikdash and everywhere else. And one of the things is, B'mikdash omeret Hashem kichtavo. In the Beit HaMikdash, when they would do Birkat Kohanim, they would say God's name as written. They knew how to pronounce it. B'medina, but everywhere outside of the Beit HaMikdash, bechinuyo. They would only use the nickname, like what we do, right? We say, right, Adoshem, right? We don't say that we can't. We don't, we don't even know how to say it anymore. The Yud Hey and then the Vav Hey, we don't know how to say that anymore. But in the Beit HaMikdash, they would do it. And for this reason, you could not look at the Kohanim when they would duchen. Seems based on this, that in modern times...
Because they were saying the name, you could look at them?
Yeah, because they would say, because again, all of these things is like too close to God. And
you're hearing them.
It's true, but you were gonna.
Never mind.
All right, I'll tell you what.
Okay.
So therefore, the Medrash has to explain what this whole deal is. So let's look what the Medrash gives, kind of an explanation, and look what it says. This is in Midrash Shir HaShirim, where it says like this. It's talking about, how the whole Shir HaShirim works is like a boy and a girl. It's kind of like a love story, but here it's always understood to be a love story between Hashem and the Jewish people. So let's see how this works. It says, Mashkiach min hachalonot. It says that the lover is looking through the window. And we're saying, but what does this mean here? They interpret it in the Midrash as miben kitfeihem shel hakohanim, that Hashem is sort of looking at us from between the shoulders of the Kohanim. Metzitz min hacharachim, like peeking through the gaps, the lattices. Miben etzbaotehem shel Kohanim, from between the fingers of the Kohanim, like Hashem is peeking out. And what does this all mean? Well, the Yefeh Kol, who's one of the commentaries here on the Medrash, says the idea is that what happens is, when the Kohanim in the Beit HaMikdash, they would lift their hands over their heads. They're making like windows between their hands and their fingers, and that's where like the Shechina is coming. So God's presence is resting on the Kohanim. And when they say God's name, the Shema Meforish, God's presence rests on their hands. And that's in fact why they say also in the Mishnah over here, it says, B'Medina, everywhere outside the Beit HaMikdash, the Kohanim, when they do Birkat Kohanim, they hold their hands, Yedehen Kneged Kitfeim. They could hold their hands at shoulder height. However, in the Beit HaMikdash, they would have to put their hands over their head. Why? Because since they are saying God's name, they are actually bringing down the Shechina, and the Shechina is like on their hands. Except for the Kohen Gadol wouldn't do that because he had God's name written on the tzitz, so he couldn't lift his hands higher than that. What?
I think they did it like that.
Well, there's different opinions as to how they actually held their fingers. There's a big machloket about that with the Zohar and not, but whatever the case, the idea is that the Shechina is on the hands of the Kohanim, at least in the Beit HaMikdash, when they would say God's name, and therefore you cannot look at that. The same way
they
that...
didn't cover it with a talus.
They did not used to cover with a talus. No, we're going to see how that all started, but they didn't do that. Now, Tosfot says, okay, Mikan Kashel Perush Rashi. They say this Gemara makes it very, very difficult on Rashi's interpretation of a different Gemara in Megillah. Let's see that different Gemara in Megillah. And this is a famous Mishnah that's in the third parak of Megillah, Chaf Daled Amud Bet, where it says, Kohen sheyesh biyadav mumim lo yisa et kapav. A Kohen who has some sort of blemish on his hands, he should not duchen. Why? The Mishnah says, Mipnei sheha'am mistaklim bo. Because people are going to look at his hands, because they want to see these like weird hands or whatever he's got over there. What kind of weird hands are we talking about? Well, here they tell you a story. They give an example here. They say, if you have yadav bohakniot, if you have bohakniot hands, lo yisad kapav, you shouldn't duchen if you have bohakniot hands. What are bohakniot hands? Rashi says it's luntais. That's in French. In Old French, it's luntais, but that has to do with the word lentil. Lentil is a bean. In other words, it's a Kohen who has on his hands splotches that are bean-sized splotches on his hands. So he has, well, you call them age spots. I call them ugly. But he has some sort of splotches on his hands. This guy shouldn't duchen. Now Rashi explains, why shouldn't this guy duchen? Rashi says, Lefisha mistaklim, because people look at him. So what's wrong with people looking at them? And it says in Chagiga, mistakel b'kohanim, b'shashin usinet kapen, and avkot. Because if you look at the Kohen, then you're going to lose your vision. But Tosfot says, Rashi, that cannot be true. Why can't it be true? Because the Gemara says that that's only in the Beit HaMikdash. And the case over there, he says, Yadav bohakniot, but that's clearly not talking about the Beit HaMikdash. How do you know that? He says, they say, Haleta, Rashi, that's not right what you said. Demaskinan, because the Gemara there concludes, our Gemara says, Dafka bizman shebeit HaMikdash kayim. It's only when the Beit HaMikdash stood. Vahatam, but over there in Megillah, it's talking about Gvulim. It's talking about outside the Beit HaMikdash. Because then they give a story there that there was a guy, B'shevevute de Rav Huna, there was a guy in Rav Huna's neighborhood who had blemished hands, and he would duchen, and they